Hello, my name is Justin Jaeckle. I'm a writer, curator and editor, and I work as a programmer for the film festival Doclisboa as well. And I'm here at Galeria ENL with Salomé Lamas, artist and filmmaker, for a conversation within the context of the exhibition that will be on show within this space. So Salomé, thank you so much for your time as ever. Perhaps we can start from what is present within this space. We have Extraction, the Raft of the Medusa, a film from 2020 behind us. And next door, of course, is a project, a kind of punctum from a new ongoing project titled Gaia. Maybe as a beginning, we could talk about the works that are here as a means of introduction.
Yeah, I think they're actually connected, or I would say that Gaia is, it's a continuation of like the aspects that I was developing in Extraction, the Raft of the Medusa. And so basically Extraction, the Raft of the Medusa was a project commissioned by Adelina von Furstenberg. She's a curator, and she was puzzled and very urgently she wanted to have a project that dealt with climate change. And she has a foundation that is somehow linked to a UN agency. So the project had the patronage of United Nations and the World Meteorological Organization. And we were asked, some of the filmmakers were asked to address, the theme of climate change and also to connect it to some earth elements somehow. And what I did was basically a sort of a translation of Jaeckle's painting, The Raft of the Medusa, using it because historically is a work that was also used by many artists and one of the most cited works within contemporary art to kind of criticize, reality somehow. And so what Jaeckle does is it's a sort of a peinture d'histoire. So it's an allegoric painting that tries to encapsulate, the whole traveling and the whole, the whole issue that came afterwards. Like this ship being taken from France that was given by the English crown, and they had some settlers to go to an African colony, and the thing was that of course there were a few survivors, and when Jaeckle exhibited the painting for the first time, it was very shocking, and so I wanted to make a connection also with, all the immigrants and all the refugees that are, somehow try to cross and they have to be dislocated out of, wars, climate change issues related, and many other things. So and I wonder, because today when you see those images on TV, we feel numb somehow. So it's like the shock that painting created, years ago, is not compared to the one that we have because we are not shocked anymore. So I need to use that. And then at the same time, I wanted to use this platform of the raft somehow to convey this sort of privileged people, and to deal also with all the new colonial aspects that we have to face, and how is that connected with the idea of interdependence. And interdependence was also something that was very much present in the project. Actually, when we put all the works together, like what Adelina did, was actually to create a feature length out of these several shorts. So in that sense, it was a very, it wasn't such an interesting project, and the idea was also to have total clearance of target audience. So I had to struggle with institutional constrained somehow, and that Adelina had also faced before when she did a series on, on other humanitarian aspects with other artists. And of course that you have to please everyone somehow and to make a product that is, consumable. And I remember that, when the climate change advisor of UN was on the phone with me, she's like, we cannot say people that they were gonna die. So it's like, and also there was something that was very present to me, and I never took it as censorship, but I would take it as, politics or realpolitik, this idea that you can't mention words such as sovereignty, colonialism, white supremacism, capitalism, and so on and so on. So those words were actually edited out. And that, so what I would like to explain or to clear out is that there's, something that was done for Interdependence, the feature that premiered in Rome last year, and this is, or 2 years ago, sorry, in 2019, exactly. And this was a reaction to it, which was like, okay, let's make it the way I would have envisioned in the first place, which is a bit much more cryptic in a way because it's very symbolic. That's also in the other one, but then it's like, you have to overlay bodies with other images because it can be a bit maybe taken as homoerotic, although they're just performers and they're dressed, like these sort of issues. And so this is actually the, my answer to Adelina's concern and Adelina's commission. Although there's a more, I wouldn't say infantilized version, but something that is slightly different. But you could say that they're, this is like calling things by their names in opposition to the other ones that just leave things a bit looser.
And there's an inherent tension or perhaps irony there. Of course, the United Nations had a role within the commissioning and funding of this work, but the work itself is dealing with the matter of a very ununited earthly body, right? Ununited nations in many ways. You flag up the tensions inherent in our fight over resources and for survival, literally. We're talking about the words that can and cannot be used also within these discourses. And I find it an interesting bridge, I guess, to jump to Gaia, to the new project as well. At the end of Extinction, Raft of the Medusa, we have at least some of humanity designing and deigning to escape the Earth. No? It ends in a roar of engines. We hear people attempting to make their exit. And I think there's often something very prescient about your work, actually, as someone who engages so much with the matter of the contemporary. Of course, this film was made in 2020, and in May 2020, I think, was Launch America, where America launched astronauts from its own soil into space for the first time, those engines kind of reaching a parallel within the engines within your work, maybe. And this project may be also announcing or signifying the beginning of the commercialization of space, actually, or space as an economic possibility. And I just wanted to make this connection to Gaia as well and bring up these kind of ideas, because we end this film with the engine roars as some of humanity escapes the Earth. And next door, we're dealing with an extraterrestrial object. Maybe we can talk about this bridge a little bit more, and we can start to discuss the Gaia projects. And it would be interesting to hear this bridge, how that bridge operates for you.
No, you're totally right, because and that is also dealing with institutions and what is this thing that we created and so-called civilization, or at least our Western world, is based on. So when you see in Extraction, you deal with concepts of interdependence, you deal with concepts of extraction, colonialism, and again, capitalism and the whole thing. And you try to have people like humans struggling within this platform. So basically, it's like the pyramid on the top tries to convey, the southern hemisphere, and the one below, it sort of symbolically represents the northern hemisphere. And you're right that, the text was produced, in dialogue with several thinkers somehow. And there is very clear this idea that like knowing without knowing, you know, and this idea of self-blindness and ignorance somehow, but that we try just don't look. And it's like next year it's like bang, you know, there's like COVID and it's right in your face. So all the warnings and everything that this work tries to claim, suddenly it's like, you know, it's like when you reach to the end and you say, oh, people were not gonna die, or when you say, you know, talking about privileges and, you know, going to Mars, I mean, it just turned into the real life. So all the signals were there, but suddenly we have to face it, and there's no place for everyone on the raft. And that, you know, in terms of like quotidian life, it's like you have hospitals that they have to opt to the people that they want to save or not, and everyone has a price. So it's actually governments, they know how much is your life worth, which is very interesting, because I was, you know, there was an article in the New Yorker the other day that you had an economy professor talking to his students over Zoom, of course, and he's trying to make that exercise, and it starts with economics, but then it lingers into philosophy somehow, because you have like students asking, okay, but would I pay for someone that I don't know? You know, it's like, would you pay for yourself? You know, and the way that we connect with each other. So like making the transition to Gaia, and that is something that, you know, you were talking about institutions and those, yeah, I mean, those were things that we created to guard somehow and to preserve this idea of Western civilization. And if you go back and think of the Republic, you know, by Plato, and the way that it already envisioned some kind of, you know, relation within politics, and that, you know, maybe we can jump also to the idea of, you know, the Greek term, ancient Greek term of person, that later was taken by Christianity and, you know, used to represent the sacred Trinity, and how is that connected later on to this idea of persona that comes to the word of person somehow. So there's like two things. It's like one thing is like our biology, and another thing is like the whole thing that we constructed, and a lot of it comes out of that comes with morality. You know, the word person, and then you have all the philosophers going after that and talking about, you know, morality and duty that is also linked with, you know, our religious background, and the way that we try also to convey rules somehow to relate to ourselves. So again, talking about institutions, okay, those are things that we created, and but it's like when Ailton Krenak claims that why do I have to fill so many papers to be sent to UNESCO, you know, to prove that Amazon has to be protected. And what is UNESCO? Because, you know, you're creating bubbles of, you know, the planet that somehow is not, you know, sick. So you can, you know, show your great-grandfather, you know, great-grandsons that, you know, this is how Earth was somehow. So Gaia basically started as a project that was commissioned by Generation, in co-production with INL, the Iberian Nanotecnologia Laboratório, which is basically one of the few laboratories, or I would say the only one in the world that has, you know, scientists and engineers on the same building, and is very, you know, interdisciplinary in that sense. And also, like, you know, Scale Travels as a program, it also tries to, you know, it shows a sort of, I wouldn't call it a trend, but, you know, a sort of continuation of what we have been realizing, which is like, you know, you had methodologies and models that were, that had some kind of processes that were run within, in order to create knowledge, in order to solve problems and to answer to that. And nowadays, I think that we are facing issues that the only solution is actually to be, calling for that interdisciplinarity within fields. And I think that arts, they play a very important role in that. So we are not being perceived as, like just contributors of knowledge and practice as research as being, taken as, a way also to engage with other fields and to come up with solutions. But then the word solution is very problematic as well, because, and that's what Gaia tries to depict, and that's why it goes and gets the material right. Because when you talk about problems and we are facing, a standpoint that we are still dealing with problems, we are not trying to change the paradigm somehow. And that is a concern, but at the same time, we are so frightened and so concerned about trying to deal with our fragility as human beings and trying to survive, basically. And then it's interesting also this idea of, at one, how we try to survive, and it's all about the continuation of the species, but we are also very suicidal somehow. This idea that we have, and that is also one of the things that is going on, this astonishment for the apocalypse, or just like this eternal question mark. And so by dealing with problems, we won't change somehow. It's like governments, they can deal with problems, that's right, because they know how much is your life worth. They just have to make up decisions concerning data, and that's very impersonal. But the biggest challenge is, like what Latour says, is how to land on Earth again. And then we can talk about interdependency again, or the way, or dependency, like Judith Butler, tries to convey this idea of violence, and how can we actually relate to each other, this idea that, if I'm harming you, I'm hurting myself somehow, so it's, and the same should be related to, to the soil that we step on, because this soil, it's all interconnected. And but humans, we have the capacity to keep redesigning ourselves, this idea of being human, it's like a big question mark, because we don't know if the other species, they would, like, which capacities they would have. And of course we have a very interesting but also powerful tool, which is technology, and the way to develop and to build, to design things. Not just the way that we design, the way we interact, or the way we design our bodies, the way we design, buildings. It's like we live in an inhabited drawing. And for me, Gaia, it started when I was visiting ENL, and afterwards, like, the guest house was, we had to evacuate. I was with Andres, Spanish assistant, and we went back to Lisbon, and afterwards I just remember walking home and feeling that the space was different, space and time had changed, and my relation to it, and also my relation to the other people, and most of us, we felt that. It's like you would see another person or another human, and you would kind of try to avoid him. And so yeah, I think that Gaia tries to just depict this idea of no, we are not immune. And tries maybe to, I wouldn't call like 3 scenarios, but let's say like 3 baskets somehow, and I'm going to put it in a very not very complex way, but you know, there's this whole idea and the whole, you know, like this movement of going back to nature and maybe trying to revert some kind of impact that we had on the planet. And then there's what you were saying, that, you know, this idea of, you know, Elon Musk and a bunch of other people that still believe that, you know, technology will save us, and there's this extraordinary positivity about all the developments. And I don't know, I read somewhere in an article, it's like Elon Musk says that, yes, it is possible to go to Mars, but the first people will gonna die. So, I mean, you know, or even James Lovelock that you know, kind of coined this term Gaia as, you know, or the Gaia hypothesis is in a way that, yes, the planet, it's all one thing, and that he would, you know, maybe say that we can, you know, we can use technology to deal with what we are facing now, and, you know, nuclear energy, and we can go that way. And also, you know, our obsession of living longer. But I think, and for me, the most interesting standpoint is something in between these two perspectives, which would be something that, yes, deals with, you know, how can we deal with this immunity knowing that we are not immune? You know, how can we, you know, why do we claim and you know, are violent to everything around us and try to, you know, construct and extract and use, but simultaneously we don't think that we are limited somehow. So and it's very, and if you look at economics, it's an absurdity to think that, you know, the capitalism has an exponential growth when, you know, it's when the resources are limited. So then, I mean, there is a very interesting guy, which is Friedrich Nietzsche, that is a bit punk and radical, but he would then claim that something like, and I'm not very good at, I'm not a theory person, but he would say that, you know, we have to be inactive for a while. We have to tolerate and accept a sort of passivity so we can have space for imagination. And within imagination, we will be able to reinvent ourselves. And maybe some of the hypotheses that will be upon us are hypotheses that we don't want to go that way. Although they can be, you know, possible solutions for whatever. So I think it's not about problems and solutions. And Gaia tries to expand a bit on that. And what happened was basically, or the way that we was developed is that I bought a meteorite on eBay and I sent it to the Nanotecnologia Laboratório for them to hatch QR codes and then to characterize and get all the textures coming out of the meteorites. That is something, you know, it's like, and also it's from Campo del Cielo, so it's like, it's been here for very, very long, before life existed. And so it's just a project that deals with the chaos that we have to deal with, you know, with the cacophony of speeches, and that, you know, within that cacophony just points to our need for, you know, silence. But it's very hard to deal with silence when we're trying to, you know, cope with everyday life, and it's like one day after the other. So what we did is, there's two parts. There's an installation here on show in the gallery, but there's also, a record publication. So we invited a couple of musicians to collaborate with the sound designer, and we tried to a bit, describe the journey of the meteorites coming from out of space into Milky Way, just entering our atmosphere, eventually, colliding with planet Earth, and then, witnessing all, ice age, volcan, these kind of changes that it existed on the planet before life emerged, and then eventually, it will witness our extinction and what will come after, and we already know that Andromeda will probably merge with the Milky Way, and it ends in kind of silent in the end. But
so silence comes back. We're saying we make a movement from cacophony back to silence. I mean, I think there's a very poetic connection there between these two projects. So literally within this space where we're sat, they kind of have this connection point, right? A journey of evacuation here, and a journey of an extraterrestrial object becoming terrestrial as it changes from a meteor to a meteorite, right? Which is what's happening next door. And I think, one of the other things that I find interesting about your current way of working, and maybe something that links both projects again, is this move from making films as discrete objects to a move to considering these works more as projects. Fata Morgana behind us exists as a 6-minute film. Extraction after the Medusa exists as a 6-minute film, a 10-minute film, a 4-screen installation, a book, which is a work. I think it feels more like a work than a publication, and even has been executed as a performance, right, as a live performance with bodies. And I know that Gaia is considered as something with multiple strands. We have an image next door that links to an immaterial collection of sounds, but we'll also have multiple films that spread out of this kind of nucleus of the project. And I'd be interested to hear you talk more about this move more towards considering your activity as one who manifests projects necessarily than films, or whether you feel that there is a difference there in the way you've been approaching this. Because I think that's something that could be said to be true from Fata Morgana, through to Extraction, through to Gaia now. They're works with multiple tentacles, multiple arms. And I'd be interested to hear you talk about that.
I was trained as a filmmaker. And I did film academy, and but at the same time I was very much interested in philosophy and theory, although I never developed that. I'm supposed to be on a PhD or enrolled since many years, but the thing is, I started making films or dealing with moving image, and somehow people from the exterior, they started to ask those projects to be exhibited in the museum space as well, because they would have properties that could be installed within the space. And then I realized that, yes, those projects, some of them, they can, transfer very well from space to space, although the experience is different. Mostly because of, the way that they were visually constructed, and also the way that, they were somehow edited. Because I realized that there's always kind of pieces, or sometimes it's, the connections are a bit more fragmented. And for me, yes, one thing is film and cinema, and cinema for me it's, much more social than, the contemporary art. That is a bit more distant and individual sort of experience. But the latest projects, I just feel that, they unfold So it's something that I don't preconceive. It's something that it's like one output is not actually fulfilling the whole project intention somehow. If you have an intention note or something you want to convey. But and then sometimes and Fata Morgana was probably the one of the longest and the one that had, you know, several unfolds, was also a project that was dealing with rewriting, you know, with the act of rewriting and constant, you know, writing and translation, and because it's a project that deals pretty much with language, and of course that language is not so disconnected from, you know, Gaia issues and the way that we use communication and words per se to, you know, and how is that, you know, a trigger also for a lot of misunderstanding, and also a lot of but power at the same time. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I see myself as a, you know, a maker or a projector, you know, someone that projects projects eventually, and it's like each, you know, you start with something and you don't know where it's going to lead you. So basically, it's you call it writing or drawing, or, you know, there is something that when you it's a very interesting because it's, you know, you just learn by doing it, no? So it's like you start making a drawing and then it's like, you know, there is something which is your initially, you know, the thing that you want to represent within that drawing, but then, you know, the act of actually starting to draw will change the whole thing, and you have to end up with that, you know, translation somehow. And within that translation and also in the way, and I'm using the drawing, I could use like an example of, you know, a project, you will get to see things. And that is not just from the perspective of the one that projects, but also, you know, all the external factors for the project. So I know that, you know, Fata Morgana, if I was gonna try to, you know, attempt this idea of drawing in a different moment than in the spectrum of 2016 until 2019, it would be a totally different project, because just the conditions around us would be different. It's like my mood would be different. And another thing is, like, you know, geographies, they change the projects. Also, like the way that you have to deal, and most of my projects, they're, you know, they're all over a bit the globe somehow, and that comes with a very selfish, you know, position of wanting to experience and a huge curiosity for what's around me, and so yeah. But I mean, you know, and then you can talk about collaborators, you know, and the way that they interfere with what you're doing. You can talk about production calendars or production models. You can talk about, and that all changes, you know, the first act of, you know, just putting the pencil on the page for the first time.
Of course.
So yeah, it's more and more they have these unfolding things, but that also has to do with my incapacity to finalize something, and is linked with a sort of, you know, compulsiveness or obsessiveness within dealing with those things.
But it also has a connection to these ideas of maybe noise or chaos and silence that you've been talking about as well a little bit. A suspicion of finitude or something, or an aversion to something being final or considered ring-fenced, which connects back to, I don't know, ideas of reservations and rafts as well, and various things. I find it interesting. I mean, for me, I always consider a film, or at least a cinematically considered film, to be one of the purest objects that exists. Though it's these days immaterial, normally coded as digital bits, it can travel far easily than any painting or sculpture can. Its conditions of experience obviously change dependent on the exhibition circumstances, but are less impacted, I think, in terms of its proximity to other things. It's really a world in itself. And I'm intrigued as to what extent these projects seem to be ways of maybe breaking the objecthood of the film as this kind of sacrosanct object. You almost then will produce this item that then comes punctured almost by the other roots that spin out of it. I'm just intrigued to what extent kind of you might consider this increasing unfolding of the work as a reaction, I guess, against the object, the cinematic object, or a way of dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you point that out, because I think that Extraction, the raft of the Medusa, is really, is maybe the project that conveys what you just described, because it's a film, it's a single channel for part of it. Mm-hmm. But also in the image that you see that there is, sort of a sculpture object in the center. It's like there's a sort of three-dimensionality mm-hmm. that the work attempts. So it's like it's questioning, the image and what is cinema, what is contemporary mm-hmm. art, what is sculpture, what mm-hmm. is the three-dimensionality of a film or of an image. And performance itself, and it's neither one thing nor the other. And so it comes out of that, maybe moment that I'm passing through. That it's not. I'm really questioning all those, fields somehow, mm-hmm. and the way that we address to them, but going back to this. So it's very hard to finalize something. So you probably finalize something when you have a deadline, or mm-hmm. or you say it's enough. Mm-hmm. Fata Morgana was over because I couldn't deal with it anymore, and it was also destroying itself. It was rotting itself, mm-hmm. and maybe Balzac has a book about. Where the painter keeps painting until he destroys the painting. Mm-hmm. At first he wanted to make the painting alive, but mm-hmm. then he ends up, it's so many layers that, and you can stay there forever. Mm-hmm. So I really relate to that. And so the only way that I can find some kind of satisfaction or comfort, small comfort, mm-hmm. is to know that there's a next project. Mm-hmm. Because then I can continue. Mm-hmm. And I can continue, I can correct things that weren't, as intended mm-hmm. on previous projects. I've gained more experience somehow. It's not that it's better, it's just, you've gathered other things. Mm-hmm. And it's like a relief because you don't have to drop everything on the same project. Mm. So sometimes it's a bit claustrophobic, but yeah, I mean.
I feel this also, to some extent, connects back to issues that were certainly extremely present in your earlier works, I think continue to be. But I'd like to maybe move the conversation to talking a little bit about the idea of parafiction, which of course was the title of a book that gathered your first projects from 2012 to 2016. And it's yet another one of these beautiful, serendipitous, cosmic ways in which you're connected to the universe, I think, because in 2016, I think Post-Truth was the Oxford University's Word of the Year. So we have a catalogue, a survey of your work dealing with the malleability of fact and fiction, right? Through the parafiction universe, being produced in the same year that suddenly the world is dealing with the fallibility or the untrustworthiness of truth. And I'd like to just talk a little bit about that, to ask you to kind of to revisit this idea of parafiction and think how it applies maybe to these projects, but more wondering, I guess the question is more about whether, looking back at this period of your work that kind of finishes with the publication of this book in 2016, whether you see that as a turning point, because you started working maybe more exclusively or more definedly within parameters of fiction after that as well. You have two shorts, Coupe de Grace from 2017, Your first maybe purely fictional film, we could say, although obviously these concepts are very blurry. And it seems to have introduced an interesting fork within your practice where some things become more theatrical, almost, within some of the works. I think a film like Extinction is very baroque, is almost like a film noir. It plays an awful lot with image and texture and sound in a way that inserts itself within cinematic codes. Yet at the same time, within this break, I feel like you start using facts as weapons, in a way, right? A fact is no longer such an amorphous thing, or a multiplicitous thing. It might actually be a stone, almost, that you can, that is somewhat weaponized, I think, within the way that kind of your texts work within Fata Morgana and maybe within Extraction as well. So I'd just kind of be interested to see whether you see a fork within there, whether working more strictly with fiction changed how you approach non-fiction work?
No, I think that, you know, when you talk about facts, facts are always false somehow, and that connects immediately with fiction. And I think that for me it started actually with No Man's Land, you know, the film with Paulo Figueiredo, where I realized the limits of, you know, non-fiction film, and this idea that when you build like a brick wall, which is based upon reality, and you claim that you're showing people a documentary that comes with some sort of authority behind it, and you then go back to the wall and remove one of those fictional bricks that you included, then the brick wall will crumble down. So the thing is that, you know, it's all about plausibility and make-believe, and what is there that stands. And where are actually the limits of non-fiction film, and what is a fact, and what is, you know, history as understood as creative writing, and where do we stand, you know, as someone that watches, which is not, and we can live, and that's connected with Gaia, our lives looking at images, you know, the images that we created. So there's this constant virtuality and this constant flirt between, you know, reality and fiction, and the way that we construct and deconstruct things. But I would like to do a second parafiction, and I envision that to be, you know, coming up within the next years, you know, that will try to encapsulate, you know, another chunk of projects that would come after, you know, the ones that were framed by parafiction. And that was published in early 2016. So you're right. I mean, for me it's still the same thing. You know, I have to depart from what's around me and reality. For me, it's very important to drink, you know, out of it, and also like the first works that I did, you know, encounters with landscape or the community, you know, some shorts. The idea was that, you know, how do I dive, you know, project myself within reality, and finding strategies or strategies to deal with the real and to trigger something within the real, so you can, you know, look for, you know, the extraordinary or the drama within it, that would, you know, propitiate the possibility of actually telling a story, or you know, and so I mean, there's a bunch of or many strategies to deal with it, and I think that each, you know, maker or projector finds its own, because for me the way that I took, you know, filmmaking, but then I would say that any project is the way of translating, you know, and you know, this is like that, you know, if you look at Benjamin and the way that he uses translation as a sort of, you know, one of the few ways that you know, concepts of fidelity and liberty come together, there is where you can actually, you know, for you to be faithful for what you are depicting, you have to have a huge freedom to convey that. And then, you know, there's a transport, and there's there's going to be changes within the process. And for me, that's what is exciting, is you know, it's this translation. And of course, some of the works were very, you know, physical. They were also like challenging in terms of, you know, being in very harsh situations, you know, like El Dorado 21, you know, that you were in La Rinconada at 5,500 meters of altitude, you know, projects that you have to react. So they're not so brainy. It's like you are in the moment with those people and you have to make your you know, your decision. So I remember doing, and when you say coup de grâce, like the short film that is strictly fiction with a fictional production model, you know, with actors and with the whole show behind you on a small level because it's a short film. I remember, you know, going to the line producer and saying, it's not fun. You know, it's like there's nothing, and I remember like I was waiting, and I was waiting for something to change, to happen, until I realized that, you know, of course nothing will change because everything that is in front of the camera, I placed it in there. So like what I can do here, it's like direct the actors and say, okay, do this instead of that. So it's like, how can you actually have fun within being on a film set for fiction? And that is something that I keep struggling with. So it's like to find a balance. And I know that if I will go that way, it has to be something that, yes, can be highly constructed, but I have to have an escape door so I can deal with something that I can grab with my own hands, in opposition to be, you know, someone that is just on this line that kills my soul.
I think it's interesting within that to think about extraction, the work of the extraction, the raft of the Medusa, again, and just isolating this word extraction. Right? For me, I find it. I love the fact that it's present within the title because I think to some extent it acts as a kind of key for your work as well. I think you've been mining, you've been extracting throughout your whole career and continue to do so. No? And maybe again within this is the difference between these two production models. No? Within observing the world and extracting your material from it versus writing the world and then constructing it as a parallel and a kind of world-building thing. But I'd like to maybe wrap up by asking to what extent you view this notion of extraction as one that is an override to the work, or how you relate to this word.
No, you're definitely right. I mean, if you talk about non-fiction film, of course you have to deal, and that was very, very clear for me again in No Man's Land, but also in El Dorado 21, when you basically, you know, I'm from the northern hemisphere, I'm Portuguese, and I went all the way to La Rinconada, which is fucking hell, you know, so it's like, it's probably the worst scenario on earth. That when I first read, you know, articles on the newspaper about it, it's like no one wants to go there. So the first time I went there for location scouting, you know, the connections that we had done with potential co-producers, they told me I should take a bodyguard. So it's like, I'm not going to make a non-fiction film taking a bodyguard with me if I'm going to, you know, be with the people and talk with the people. So there's like two things here. One thing is like my need to just be there and feel it back, and even if it physically, you know, and to explore those limits and to be there with the people. And when I'm there, I'm there. Although in some scenarios you have to create some kind of shield because there's no way you can deal with such, you know, harsh scenarios, or in Transnistria, you know, where there's no diplomatic coverage, and suddenly things can go wrong. But there is something that is also very clear to me initially, that is, you know, this comes with some sort of responsibility. You know, a documentary film, it's dirty. Because you go and extract, and you turn like you know, private matters into public, and you come up with things that you tell people that those things, they happen that way, you know. So for me, I was never pleased with that, and I was never pleased with making like a strong statement or coming with a thesis, because who am I to actually claim, you know, the work of an historian or journal? You know, we have different roles. So I was never, and I feel that, you know, some of the cinema has a big impact because they claim things and they make people change some of their behavior, or but that's not for me. You know, I'm much more interested in the questions that can be created, and most of the questions that I try to raise are bigger than myself and are bigger than the ones that I depict. And usually they're things that are played within the shades, you know, that are not, it's very hard to come up with moral judgments upon those. It's very hard to describe them sometimes. It's very hard to imprint them in a single image. And it's very hard to say how is that can be thought, or so what I try to explore is that there is a kind of a dialectic that it can happen with the viewer or the spectator, that, you know, a sort of a desire that he tries to project himself into the frame. Because there is one thing that is very clear as well, that is like, what am I making? And what is it, you know, you that are seeing making for it? And what is the one that I'm trying to depict making for it? So I'm someone that I would say that I think I'm generous to all those processes, and I want to listen to them, and I want to, you know, if I'm dealing with something that is, you know, that has to be taken into consideration, like everything around us is like, I want it to be fair for everyone, even if it's never fair for everyone, because, you know, you're the one that is projecting, you're the one that is making. But there are different ways that you can, you know, strategies to deal with interviews, or to deal with, you know, the ones that you are using, and in the end you are using. So it's like, how can you make this power, you know, this connecting power productive somehow, and not, you know, and something that you feel okay with, and knowing that someone will eventually have to do it, and you would rather do it the way that you feel at peace with. But I think everyone comes up with a different, you know, way of doing it, and there are films and filmmakers that I condemned for dealing with certain issues, or not about dealing with those themes or issues, but the way that they translate that. That I think there is no excuse, because they fall into pornography. So, you know, there is one thing with dealing with the real and showing violent images on a screen, and, you know, perpetuating a sort of you know, hyperactivity and model and image consumption that we have to deal with. And I think that sometimes some of the projects are a bit orthopedic in that way, you know, a sort of a resistance against, you know, I never did slow cinema, but, you know, El Dorado 21 opens with a 1 hour long shot, and it's about you being there for a while. Also, in the same way, you try to, you know, try to explain a bit what is happening in La Rinconada. So for me, it was very clear that, you know, you have to take responsibility for your acts, you know, not just for the ones that are in front of you when you're producing it, but for the ones that will, you know, afterwards, they will have to see it. But usually, you know, it asks for, or it demands for an active spectator. Otherwise, the work will fail if you don't enter in dialogue. And some of the works, they might be too cryptic or too symbolic or allegoric as well. And with dealing with allegories, you create a distance. So sometimes they are too cold. and hard to, you know, to perceive. So, but this, it's interesting because in one way, when you're on the field, you're very passionate, and it's something very direct, you know. But then, and it's also when you're building those works, there's a balance between, because at one hand you try to, you know, wait and to see, you know, and to feel what's around you in order to construct something, and then that will give origin, because sometimes it's really a question mark. You are into situations that you don't know. You know, you have an idea of you have a macro vision of what you want to output, but you have challenges, you know, every day that might interfere with that. So you're like struggling within the making, and for me it's very important to have some structure. So it's like I don't film when there's nothing to film that has, you know, a place within what I'm producing. Because there has to be a reason for that, and so that will originate then, you know, the sort of objects that we've been talking, that they're usually, you know, very structured and sometimes even mathematic in the way, because that is my security, that, you know, then I can leave those buckets or those pockets of where I have absolutely no idea, and I'm looking for the most. First, I'm looking for, you know, yeah, those experiences and those limits. I'm looking for. Some sort of way to engage with the world, and then, you know, and I'm looking for things that can be shown to other people, things that can be, you know, maybe I'm not the one to claim certain things, but other disciplines will be able to actually take those works and reflect upon them and maybe act within certain realities. So I'm, you know, and I can give you an example. You know, Eldorado 21 deals with, yes, you know, La Rinconada is it's an open mind to it's like gold rush in modern times, but it's curious that, you know, it's a film that is being sold in black markets, and you know, next to a Hollywood film, because people feel that, you know, they feel that they connect to it, or that the film can be acquired for educational purposes to be shown to mining engineers.
Wow.
You know, it's a thing that I wouldn't expect. Or the same with No Man's Land, with having people saying that, you know, within, you know, our colonial past in Portugal is very present, and it's still a bit a trauma and a taboo. It's like things are not addressed as it should be, like and suddenly have people talking. So, I mean, yeah, and on one hand there's passion, but on the other hand, you know, there's this sort of need for you know, something to hold it in the end. That comes with that more, you know, formal aspect, that the composition of the frame, and sometimes that, you know, sort of cold that can be felt across the images.
I guess just there's something interesting there within talking about kind of active and passive filmmaking, active and passive audiences as well, that maybe in some ways takes us to the opening lines of your most recent finished film, Hotel Royale, again produced within the construct of fiction, a fictional system, to be considered possibly a fictional film, but with a lot of engagement with the real, as ever, within your work. And the opening lines, I think, of the voiceover, which operates both sort of as the voice of the chambermaid, sort of as a God's eye perspective, sort of as a way of the screenplay being read along with us, reads, "There's no need to reinvent the world, paying close attention to it is enough." And I feel to some ways that's kind of dialogue so neatly kind of with what you've just been talking about, and I think we also so much hear your words within this opening of the film itself too. And I think maybe with that, it's probably an organic time to close the conversation and say thank you so much for your time, and thank you for all the attention that you pay to the world to help us engage with it as well. Thank you, Salomé Lamas.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thank you.